Night in Burkina Faso. The earth trembled with the sound of gunfire, as if the land itself cried out in fury. Smoke curled into the moonlight, and the desert wind carried the acrid scent of burning gunpowder. In the capital's outskirts, where the dry grasslands met the dim glow of barracks, a battle was unfolding, not one of nations clashing on open fields, but of shadows against shadows, brother against brother. Pinned down behind the remnants of a concrete wall, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier who would later stand as president, gripped his rifle, sweat running down his temple. Bullets chipped stone around him. His breath was steady, but his mind churned. He had been betrayed. Somewhere in the darkness, men he once saluted, men who had sworn loyalty, had turned their guns against him. The world around him seemed to collapse in betrayal. Generals who once spoke of unity now plotted his death. Foreign financiers whispered that Burkina Faso would bend, that no leader could stand against their terms. And now rebels slipped into the capital itself, guided by treacherous hands. But in that moment, when the battlefield screamed of despair, something strange happened. From the haze, through the smoke, emerged a figure. Not a man, but a dog. Its coat was rough, a mix of dust and scars, eyes glowing with an eerie intensity as if reflecting firelight. The animal darted into the line of fire, barking with fury. Enemies turned their sights to silence it, but their distraction gave Traoré his moment. He leapt, moved, fired, and lived. It was madness. It was impossible. It was fate. For in the deadliest night of his life, a lone dog would alter the course of a nation. What happened that night would be remembered not just as a battle, but as the night a dog saved the future of Burkina Faso. To understand the night of the Hound, we must go back. Back to the hunger, the betrayal, the shadows that birthed this moment. Burkina Faso was a nation starved of its own wealth. Its fields of gold, one of the richest in West Africa, poured endlessly into foreign hands. IMF officials arrived in crisp suits, delivering ultimatums disguised as aid. Loans came with chains, not relief. Every month, ships left African, soil heavy with treasure, while children lay on mats with empty stomachs. Captain Ibrahim Traoré was young compared to the generals who surrounded him. His uniform carried no medals of vanity, only the dust of long marches through villages and fields. He had risen not because he was hungry for power, but because others had failed. To the poor, he was hope. To the powerful, he was a threat. The whispers began early. He is too bold. He thinks himself another Sankara. He must be contained. But the people, farmers, mothers, laborers, clung to him. They saw in him the echoes of a leader lost decades earlier, Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who once promised dignity for Africa. Traoré bore that ghost like a second skin, his very presence reminding the old guard of a dream they had long buried. The generals hated him for it. There were 3 of them, veterans of power, men who had dined with foreign ambassadors and signed contracts in smoke-filled rooms. To the outside world, they were statesmen. To Traoré, they were vultures. They smiled in council meetings, applauded his speeches, yet, in secret, they plotted. They whispered with the IMF, assured rebel leaders that Traoré's days were numbered, and promised foreign powers that Burkina Faso would soon fall back in line. And in the quiet corridors of the barracks they spoke of one thing only: eliminate him before he becomes untouchable. The people's hunger beyond the capital, the land was breaking. Drought carved scars into fields. Mothers waited at dry wells with empty pots. In the north, rebels crept through villages, seizing food, turning hunger into weapon. Soldiers grew, restless, morale sinking. Everywhere Traoré went, he heard the same cry: "We are dying. Do something." But what could he do? The treasury was chained by IMF dictates. The generals sabotaged him at every step. Even foreign allies turned their backs. And in the heart of this storm, He felt the loneliness of power, the crushing weight of being the last barrier between his people and collapse. It was during these bleak days that the dog first appeared. At first, no one knew its origin. Some said it had wandered in from the desert. Others whispered it was a ghost, a spirit sent by ancestors. Soldiers joked it was a spy, watching Traoré with unblinking eyes. But there was something unsettling, something almost deliberate about it. Wherever Traoré went, to inspect troops, to walk through starving villages, even to stand in tense councils, the dog lingered at the edges of sight. It never barked without reason, never attacked without cause. Its loyalty was unasked, for yet undeniable. One night, after a long council filled with veiled threats, Traoré stepped into the dark courtyard of the barracks. The dog stood there, silent, watching. He should have ignored it. He should have sent it away. Instead, he simply nodded to it, as though recognizing a fellow soldier in a war that gave no rest. From that night on, it was his shadow. The soldiers began to talk. They say the captain walks with a spirit hound. No bullet will touch him as long as it is near. The dog knows. It always knows. The generals heard the whispers too, and it unsettled them. For power crumbles not, only with bullets but with myths. And if a stray dog could become a symbol, then Ibrahim Traoré was more dangerous than they feared. And so the stage was set. A nation strangled by hunger. A leader hunted by betrayal. 3 generals sharpening their knives. And a dog, silent, watching, as if waiting for the hour when destiny would demand its loyalty. What no one knew was how soon that hour would come. Under the burning sun of Burkina Faso, the days that followed carried the weight of invisible chains. The IMF's messengers returned, armed not with guns, but with contracts and threats. They spoke of figures, deficits and reforms, but their words were daggers. Their ultimatum was simple: surrender the gold, cut what little rations remained, and bend the knee, or the country would starve under sanctions. The generals, too, played their part. In closed meetings, they whispered to Traoré that resistance was foolish, that pragmatism demanded obedience, but he could see in their eyes a different hunger, not for survival, but for power. They were not advisors. They were vultures circling, waiting for the flesh of his failure. Traoré returned to the streets, where the truth lived. Children with hollow eyes stared at him. Mothers stretched their hands in desperate pleas. He carried the weight of each gaze like stones in his chest. His speeches grew darker, his voice sharpened with anger against those who bled Africa dry. Yet each time he stood before the people, the dog was there, silent, watching, a shadow that gave shape to whispers of fate. Soldiers began to believe. It was not chance. The animal had a purpose. Rebels tightened their grip on the north, their movements swift and calculated, as if guided by unseen hands. Villages burned, crops stolen, families displaced. The suffering spread like fire in dry grass, consuming all. Within the barracks, discontent grew. Soldiers complained of empty plates, of salaries that never came, of fighting without reason. Some began to doubt him. Some began to talk of desertion. The generals watched this unrest with quiet satisfaction, feeding it in secret. But there were moments when despair seemed complete, when the dog revealed its strange presence. On a night march through the savannah, when ambush seemed certain, it barked wildly at a patch of brush, scattering rebels before they could strike. Another time, it dragged a wounded soldier from the line of fire, saving him from certain death. These stories spread faster than orders, turning into legend. The Hound, they said, was no mere stray. It was the guardian of the captain. Still, the darkness pressed harder. Word arrived that rebel forces, armed by foreign backers, were preparing something bold, not another raid on villages, but a strike at the capital itself. They would come under the cover of night, and they would not come alone. They had inside help, Traoré suspected, but proof was elusive. The generals smiled in his presence, but their eyes betrayed contempt. They assured him of loyalty, yet their movements carried secrecy. And then came the night when the dog began to grow restless, pacing outside the barracks, barking into the darkness, as if it sensed a storm no man could yet see. That night, the trap was sprung. Explosions shattered the silence, the gates of the encampment torn open by rebel fire. Soldiers scrambled from their beds, confused and disoriented. Shouts filled the air, commands and betrayals tangled into chaos. Among the defenders, hesitation reigned. Some fought, others fled. And in the shadows, the treachery of the generals revealed itself. They had guided the enemy within the walls. Bullets carved through the night as Ibrahim Traoré found himself encircled. He fired back, every shot measured, every movement desperate. Smoke stung his eyes, and the weight of betrayal crushed him. The end seemed certain. The enemy was too many, and his allies too few. But then, through the fire and fury, the dog burst into the fray. It lunged at traitors, pulling them down in snarls and blood. It barked warnings of danger, dragged him from exposed ground, and turned chaos into moments of survival. Soldiers who had faltered found their courage rekindled at the sight of the Hound's defiance. They fought harder, rallied, believing destiny itself had taken their side. For 93 minutes, the barracks became a battlefield of shadows and fire. Brothers turned against brothers. The air shook with explosions, the ground slick with blood. And through it all, the dog never left his side. The rising tide of betrayal had reached its peak. What remained was the reckoning, the clash that would decide not just the fate of a man, but the survival of a nation. The night carried the weight of eternity. The stars above were veiled in smoke, and the cries of wounded men echoed across the barracks like a chorus of broken souls. Ibrahim Traoré stood amid it all, his rifle gripped tight, his uniform torn and stained with dust and blood. Around him, chaos had found its rhythm. The rebels pushed hard, guided by traitorous hands, while loyalists fought with desperation. The three generals were nowhere to be seen on the front lines. They hid in shadows, issuing orders that sent soldiers into traps, pretending loyalty while bleeding him from within. They believed the night belonged to them. They believed history would soon close the chapter on Ibrahim Traoré. But the battle was not finished. Gunfire lit the night in bursts of orange and white, illuminating the strange figure that moved always at his side. The dog. Its growls were low, guttural, primal, each lunge carrying a fury no soldier could match. When rebels tried to flank him, the Hound was there first. When traitors took aim from corners of rubble, it leapt before the bullet could fly. Its coat was streaked with blood, some of it its own, yet it fought on, untamed, unbroken. The minutes bled into each other. Time itself seemed to slow, each heartbeat a drum, each shot a verdict. 93 minutes stretched like a lifetime, every second threatening to be the last. Traoré moved with precision, his eyes locked on the shadows, his body guided not just by training, but by a will larger than himself. In the thick of the fight, one of the generals emerged. His voice carried through the smoke. "Stand down, Captain. Your men are beaten. You cannot win tonight." Traoré answered with silence, and a shot that felled the rebel beside the general. The dog growled, teeth bared, as if to echo his defiance. The second general tried a different tactic. From atop a vehicle, he shouted promises of safety to the wavering soldiers. "Lay down your arms, and you will live. Follow Traoré, and you will die with him." Some soldiers faltered, torn between fear and loyalty. The night seemed to waver with their decision. It was then the dog sprang, leaping into the vehicle, tearing the general from his perch. The sight of him dragged down into the dirt shattered the illusion of his power. Soldiers who had doubted, moments earlier, roared with fury, charging back into the fray, hearts reignited by the sight of treachery punished. The battle swayed, brutal and unrelenting. Fires spread across the compound, sparks raining from shattered walls. Men fought hand to hand, bayonets clashing, fists breaking against helmets. The ground was slick, the air suffocating. And then came the final betrayal. The third general stepped forward, his pistol drawn, aimed not at rebels, but at Traoré himself. From a few paces away, his voice was calm, almost pitying. "You could have been great, Captain, but greatness bows. You refused, and now you end here." For a moment, the world froze. The pistol gleamed in firelight, the muzzle steady, the trigger tightening. Traoré stared down the barrel, unflinching, his fate balanced on the edge of a finger. But fate did not stand idle. The dog hurled itself between them, knocking the general off balance. The shot rang out, grazing Traoré's arm but sparing his life. In that heartbeat of chaos, Traoré moved, his rifle cracked, and the traitor fell. The silence that followed was not peace but awe. The last of the generals lay still, their coup broken, their betrayal crushed beneath the weight of defiance. Around them, rebels faltered, retreating as the tide turned. Loyalists, bloodied but unbroken, surged forward to drive them out. 93 minutes ended with smoke rising to the heavens and the ground littered with the wreckage of ambition. And at the center of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, not alone, but beside the wounded hound that had saved his life more times than he could count. The battle was won, but its cost was carved into flesh and memory. The dog staggered, its body trembling, blood dark against its fur. Soldiers who moments earlier had fought like demons now stood in silence, eyes fixed on the animal as if they had witnessed something divine. Traoré knelt, placing his hand on its neck. The animal's chest rose and fell with labored breaths, its eyes still fierce, still loyal. In that moment, the captain was not just a leader of men. He was a man who had been carried through death itself by a creature no one had believed mattered. The night belonged to them, but what would come with the dawn was yet unknown. The dawn after the battle was unlike any other. The air was heavy with smoke, the barracks reduced to broken walls and scorched earth. Fires still smoldered where grenades had struck, and the cries of the wounded mingled with the silence of the dead. Burkina Faso had bled in the night, but it had not broken. Ibrahim Traoré walked slowly through the wreckage, his boots crunching against shattered stone and spent casings. Every step carried the weight of those who had fallen. Loyalists saluted weakly as he passed, some propped against walls with bandages wrapped hastily around their wounds. Others lay still, covered with tattered blankets. Their sacrifice, he knew, would never be forgotten. But the eyes of the soldiers were not on him alone. They looked also to the dog. The hound staggered beside him, limping, its coat matted with blood and dirt. It was wounded, but alive, and in its survival lay the spark of something larger than any man. Whispers spread faster than fire through dry grass. They fought together. The hound saved him. Destiny itself protects our leader. By midday, the story had already transformed. The dog was no longer a stray, no longer nameless. It was the battle hound of Burkina, a living legend, born in the chaos of betrayal. The three generals who had betrayed him were finished. One lay dead by his bullet, another torn down by soldiers enraged by treachery. The last clung to life in chains, awaiting judgment. Their fall was not just personal. It was political. Their absence tore down the facade of control the old guard had maintained. For decades, foreign hands had relied on men like them, puppets, in uniforms, to keep Africa compliant. Now, in a single night, they were gone. The IMF delegation returned within days, Furious at the bloodshed and the defiance, they came armed with papers, contracts, threats disguised as diplomacy. They spoke of sanctions, of starvation, of how Burkina Faso would crumble if it refused obedience. Traoré stood before them, his arm still bandaged, the weight of sleepless nights pressing on his shoulders. He said nothing at first, letting silence sharpen like a blade. Then, with a voice low and steady, he spoke. "Last night, they tried to break us. Generals betrayed us. Rebels stormed our gates, and still we stand. You think we will fall for hunger when we have already stared death in the face. You think we will bend when even a dog chose loyalty over betrayal. No, Burkina Faso will not kneel." The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time, the men in suits realized they were not speaking to a leader seeking approval. They were speaking to a man unafraid of their threats. They left with their contracts unsigned, their power shaken. News of the battle spread far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, first by rumor, then by report, and finally by myth. Across Africa, in dusty marketplaces and crowded streets, the story was retold. The president cornered in the night, saved by a hound that fought like a soldier. In Ghana, old men sitting under trees whispered that it was the spirit of Sankara himself, returned in the form of a dog to protect the revolution. In Mali, women sang of the guardian hound, while pounding millet in wooden bowls, their voices weaving the tale into rhythm. In Nigeria, children painted murals of a soldier and his dog standing together against fire and betrayal. The story grew larger with each telling. Some said the dog had taken a bullet meant for him. Others swore it could see treachery before it happened, a spirit animal sent by ancestors. Whether truth or myth, it no longer mattered. The hound had become a symbol, and symbols carry power beyond bullets and contracts. For Traoré, the days after the battle were heavy with decision. He had survived, yes, but survival was only the beginning. The betrayal had exposed the rot in his army, the depth of foreign interference, and the fragility of his young government. He buried his dead with honor. Soldiers, villagers, even the nameless rebels were laid to rest beneath the red earth, drums echoing as the people mourned. At the front of the procession walked the dog, limping, still scarred but defiant. Men saluted it as though it wore uniform. Women threw flowers in its path. In speeches, Traoré did not glorify himself. He spoke instead of loyalty, of courage, of how even the smallest and least expected among them, a stray dog, had shown the spirit of Burkina Faso. He told his people, "If a hound can stand against betrayal and fight for what is right, then so can we. We are not weak. We are not poor. We are not slaves. We are Africa, and Africa rises." What began in whispers became a movement. The story of the hound became a rallying cry, its image painted on walls, stitched into banners, carried in marches. It symbolized not just loyalty, but the idea that destiny itself was on the side of the oppressed. The IMF's grip loosened as fear spread. Foreign powers hesitated, wary of fueling a fire that was no longer confined to one nation. And within Burkina Faso, the people found unity in their shared legend. Soldiers who had doubted now stood taller. Villagers who had starved found reason to endure. Children played at being the battle hound, charging into fields with sticks as swords, barking their courage into the air. But Traoré himself carried a quieter burden. At night, when the fires were low and the drums silent, he sat with the hound by his side. He cleaned its wounds, fed it scraps of meat, and stared into its eyes. There was no mystery there, no divine glow, only the raw, simple loyalty of a creature that had chosen him when others had not. And yet he could not escape the thought, why him? Why had the dog chosen to stay at his side that night when so many men had betrayed? Was it chance? Was it fate? Or was it a reminder that leadership was not about crowns, medals, or speeches, but about loyalty given and loyalty returned. As the weeks turned into months, the dog healed. It no longer limped. It walked with him through the streets, through the barracks, through the villages. Wherever they went, people cheered, children reached to touch it, and elders bowed their heads in respect. The hound had become more than an animal. It was a living emblem. In its scars, the people saw their own suffering. In its survival, they saw their own hope. And across Africa, something stirred. Leaders who had long bent under the weight of foreign pressure now faced restless citizens, demanding dignity. The story of the battle hound of Burkina spread like fire, igniting imaginations. Could a stray dog save a president? Then perhaps the people themselves could save a continent. On the anniversary of the battle, Traoré stood before a sea of citizens in Ouagadougou. Behind him, the flag of Burkina Faso waved in the dry wind. Beside him, as always, stood the dog. His voice carried strong and clear. They tried to chain us with hunger. They tried to break us with betrayal. But we endured. We endured because courage cannot be bought, because loyalty cannot be sold, and because even the smallest among us, a hound, forgotten and unwanted, reminded us of what it means to fight for one another. The crowd roared, a thunder of voices rising like a storm. For a moment, it was not just a speech. It was a declaration, a reminder, a promise. And as the sun set on that day, casting gold over the faces of thousands, one question lingered in every heart, carried on every breath. Was it chance, or was it fate, that the future of a nation, and perhaps a continent, was saved? Not by generals, not by armies, but by a dog. The years rolled forward, but that night, the night of fire, betrayal, and salvation, never faded. It lived in the minds of the people, retold by elders, sung by griots, painted on walls by children who had not yet been born when the gunfire cracked. It became history, myth, and prophecy all at once. In the capital, a statue was raised, not of a general or politician, but of the hound, standing tall, teeth bared, eyes unyielding. At its side, a soldier's hand rested gently on its neck. Carved in bronze, the bond between man and beast immortalized. Pilgrims came from villages far away just to touch the paws of the statue, whispering prayers for courage, loyalty, and strength. But the dog itself remained alive, living not as a statue but as a presence. It aged with the passing years, its fur graying, its movements slower. Yet wherever Traoré went, it followed. State visits, inspections of fields, speeches in villages. The hound was there, limping but proud, carrying with it the weight of memory. Traoré too bore the scars of that night. The faint line across his arm where the general's bullet grazed him never vanished, and sometimes, when he looked at it, he saw again the flash of betrayal, the muzzle of the pistol, the leap of the hound. It was a reminder that life is never promised, that leadership is not survival by strength alone, but by bonds no enemy can sever. In quiet moments, away from crowds and speeches, he would kneel beside the dog and run his hand across its fur. To him it was not myth, not symbol, not spirit. It was simply a creature that had chosen to stay. And in that choice lay a lesson greater than all treaties and strategies, that loyalty, in its purest form, is what saves nations. The world, too, had not forgotten. Across Africa, the tale became a seed of defiance. Movement sprouted from it, protests carried its name, songs wove its legend. In Nairobi, in Accra, in Dakar, murals of a soldier and his hound appeared on crumbling walls, painted in bold strokes of red, green, and gold. The message was the same everywhere. Courage can come from the most unexpected places, and loyalty can shake empires. Foreign powers watched with unease. They had dismissed it as superstition, as a quaint African fable. But they had underestimated the power of a story. Contracts and sanctions could choke economies, but they could not erase belief. And belief was rising like a tide. One evening, years after the battle, Traoré walked through the quiet fields on the edge of Ouagadougou. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in crimson and gold. The dog walked beside him, slower now, each step measured but steady. The world around them was calmer. Villages were rebuilding, markets alive, children laughing in streets. But he knew that calm was never permanent. Struggle always returned. He paused, looking over the fields, and spoke softly, not to a crowd, not to cameras, but to the hound at his side. They will remember you more than me, old friend. And that is how it should be, because you reminded us all of something simple, that we are never truly alone, not when loyalty exists. The dog looked up at him, eyes clouded with age, but still carrying that same fierce fire. It wagged its tail once, slow but strong, as though in agreement. When the hound's final day came, the nation mourned. Bells tolled across the capital, markets closed, and tens of thousands gathered in the streets. Soldiers carried its body draped in the flag of Burkina Faso. It was buried not in shadow, but in the earth of the capital, among heroes. Upon its grave, the people laid flowers, not with grief alone, but with gratitude. And Ibrahim Traoré, standing above the resting place of the creature that had once leapt between him and death, spoke words that trembled through the silence. It was not a dog that saved me, it was loyalty, it was courage. And if even a hound can give such gifts, then what excuse have we, who call ourselves men, not to do the same for our people? The crowd roared in answer, a sound like thunder across the plains. And so the legend endured. Not just of a battle, not just of betrayal, but of a night when loyalty itself wore fur and bared its teeth, and in doing so, saved the future of a nation. For generations to come, whenever Burkina Faso stood on the edge of despair, the people would whisper the same. Question, their voices rising like prayer. Was it chance, or was it fate, that the soul of a nation once walked on 4 legs?